Thank you. Okay, so I'll walk you through what's required for a conceptual application. Next slide. All right, so this 531, this is the application form. And when you're submitting a conceptual application, there is a choice in part 1 where you only have to fill out parts 1 through 4, 7, and 10. And you also have to fill out the header. So at the header, you'll enter the TA number that was assigned to you at the project determination, the tenant name, choose your facility from the dropdown, and enter a brief description of the project and date. And this automatically populates on each page. Part 1, like I said, choose conceptual, fill out parts 1 through 4, 7, and 10 only. Part 2 is the project location information, where you'll enter detailed narrative of scope, location of the space, work on the floor, square footage, the lease or permit number if known, your estimated construction costs, and construction start or end date, and your desired occupancy date. Part 3, you'll enter your tenant information and tenant's rep's name and contact information, as well as any subtenant information if applicable. Part 4 is the architect or engineer record information, where you'll enter the firm name, title, contact information, license number, and state. Next slide. Okay, and so we'll move on to part 7, where you'll check off the applicable boxes. So for all applications, the 531 is required. The cover letter should also be required. Sorry, it's not checked off here. And then you'll check off any of the drawings that you're submitting with your conceptual review. So in this case, architectural drawings. And part 10 is where the architect or engineer will digitally sign and, digitally sign and seal the 531 and upload this with your conceptual submission. Next slide. Okay, so moving on to an initial application. So once you're ready to formally submit for a Port Authority review for approval to construct after the completion of your design, there are a few forms and documents that need to be submitted along with your drawings. So the following slides will walk you through each of the required forms, which includes the 531, the PH 107, which is the drawing list, the EMP determination or the management plan, the PA 3677, which is the asbestos certification form, the executed SPIF, along with the credit checklist and backup information, as well as the cover letter from the architect or engineer record. Next slide. So again, I'll start with the 531 form. The header, same as before. As for part 1, you'll now choose initial application, and you do have to fill out parts 1 through 9. Part 2 is your project location information. The same applies as before, so you can move on to the next slide. Part 3, again, is tenant information. Part 4 is your architect or engineer record information. Part 5, you can now enter your GC information if you have it. So that's the name, the company name, and contact information, as well as part 6, the MWB program information, contact information as well. Next slide. So again, part 7 is meant as a checklist feature, and it should assist you to make sure you submit a complete application. On part 7, you'll see all the blue highlighted items, and those are hyperlinks to any forms, the TCRM, and the roadmap. And we also have asterisks. So double asterisk is a requirement for all submissions. A single asterisk is required for initial applications only. And the architect or engineer record should choose all the boxes that apply. There's also a field for the applicant or architect engineer record to input other attachments. Next slide. Part 8 is the tenant rep name, which automatically populates if you filled it out on the first page. And this is where the tenant should sign and date before the architect or engineer records, so as to not void the architect or engineer records digital seal. Part 9, you'll see the initial TA submission is automatically checked. and the architect or engineer should digitally sign and seal after the tenant signs Part 8. There's also an option on the bottom to choose the interim review process. Next slide. Okay, along with the 531, you'll also attach the PH 107 drawing list, which is an Excel form. And this just highlights the name of the document and the dates should match the drawings shown in red and green. Next slide. You'll also submit the AOR cover letter. Here's a sample. You want to include a descriptive narrative of the scope of work and purpose of the submittal on the AOR company letterhead. And all letters should be digitally signed by the AOR and uploaded with the initial submission. Next slide. So the EMP determination, this document is where the AOR will determine whether an EMP is required. For all interior work only projects, you do not require the management plan. So the AOR will just sign the bottom portion of this document and upload with the initial submission. Next slide. If a management plan is determined to be required, then the AOR will refer to this document. There's a cover page with a guidance document for relevant information. And this checklist should be attached to the management plan and signed by the environmental professional and also uploaded along with the initial submission. Next slide. PA 3677 asbestos certification form. So the top portion, again, you'll enter the TA number, tenant name, project location, and brief description of work. It should match what you're submitting with your 531. And for the middle portion, there's 3 parts, and you have to choose one of the 3. So part 1 is the non-asbestos project. Part 2 is asbestos containing material present but not to be disturbed. And part 3, asbestos containing material project. And I want to highlight in part 1, there is a section where you may need to attach a asbestos survey. So look at that carefully, either a survey or a letter from the architect. So just take a look when you choose one of those boxes. And on the bottom portion, the AOR should digitally sign and seal with third-party verification, and the asbestos surveying firm should also digitally sign and upload with the initial submission. And this is just an example of the executed SPIF, similar to what Christian previously mentioned. So you'll attach that executed SPIF on the left, as well as the project credit checklist in the middle, and to the right, any supporting documentation. Next slide. Okay, moving on to any subsequent submissions. So after a conditional or withhold has been issued, a subsequent submittal for Port Authority review is required for any response to open design comments or scope changes. So the following forms are required for subsequent submission. I'll go through them quickly. They are similar to what you submitted initially, which is the 531 cover letter. We are adding a narrative of changes and revising the PH 107 drawing list. So for subsequent submission, you'll choose on part 1, subsequent submission, and you only have to fill out parts 1, 7, and 10. Part 7, you'll check off the 531, the drawing list, the cover letter, narrative of changes, and any other applicable work types. For any drawing revisions, you have to submit a full set of drawings for the specific discipline, and all changes should be bubbled. As for part 10, you'll choose a submission number and type, whether change in scope or response to outstanding comments, and the AOR should digitally sign and seal. And again, you have the option on the bottom to choose the interim review process for your subsequent submission. Next slide. Okay, are there any questions?